My name is Arthur Hayes, I'm 30 years old, and I'm the executive chef and owner of one of the most promising restaurants in New Orleans, Louisiana. My entire life, I lived under the absolute control of a woman who should have loved me unconditionally, but who actually saw me only as an extension of herself, my mother, Eleanor Vance. If you like stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, subscribe to the channel now. There are 2 new, unreleased stories here every day, and each one is more impactful than the last. Eleanor had always been an imposing figure in New Orleans society. At 60, she commanded social circles with the same precision I used to season my dishes. But behind the facade of a dedicated mother, there was a calculating manipulator who turned my life into a rehearsed choreography, where every move depended on her approval. Since childhood, every decision went through her filter. When I expressed interest in culinary arts at 18, Eleanor scoffed. "Cooking is for servants, Arthur. You're going to study law or medicine." I gave in. I studied law for 2 years until I couldn't fake a passion that didn't exist anymore. The guilt she imposed on me for wasting her investment lasted for years. My first serious girlfriend, Jessica, was systematically sabotaged. Eleanor would invent family commitments during all our dates, create embarrassing situations when Jessica came for dinner, and constantly whisper poison in my ear. "She's not good enough for you, honey. A mother knows these things." Jessica broke up with me after 6 months, exhausted by the psychological warfare. At 28, I finally managed to open my first restaurant, but Eleanor controlled the finances. She was co-signer on all bank accounts, had access to contracts, and gave her opinion on every hire. "It's to protect you," she always said. "The business world is cruel. You need your mother's experience." The restaurant prospered, but I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Eleanor would show up unannounced, rearrange the kitchen layout according to her vision, interfere with the menu, and treat my employees like servants. They respected me professionally, but I saw pity in their eyes when she appeared. I tried to set boundaries several times. "Mom, I need independence," I would say. She would cry, talk about sacrifices, about how she had dedicated her entire life to me, about her loneliness after my father's death. The guilt consumed me, and I would back down, as always. Then I met Clara Miller. Clara was different. A librarian, 34 years old, with a quiet intelligence that immediately attracted me. She observed, analyzed, and wasn't easily intimidated. When I introduced her to Eleanor, I felt the room temperature drop 10 degrees. "A librarian?" Eleanor smiled with disdain. "How interesting. And you plan to work with old books your whole life, dear?" Clara responded serenely. "I prefer ancient knowledge to modern ignorance, Mrs. Vance." At that moment, I realized Eleanor had met her first real adversary. During our courtship, Eleanor intensified her sabotage attempts. She would call crying about imaginary health problems during our dates. She spread gossip about Clara in our social community. She even went as far as inventing that Clara was only interested in my money. "Arthur," Eleanor would say with tears in her eyes, "a mother feels these things. This woman is going to destroy you." But Clara remained firm. "Your mother isn't trying to protect you," she told me one night after a particularly tense dinner. "She's possessing you. There's a difference." Those words planted the first seed of my liberation. When I proposed to Clara, Eleanor had what I can only describe as a controlled breakdown. She cried for 3 days, said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, threatened to cut family ties. Then she changed strategy. She decided she would control every aspect of the wedding. "Let Mommy take care of everything, honey," she said, already recovered. "You don't understand these social things. I'll make sure it's perfect." And it was at that moment that I made a decision that would change everything. She would control the wedding, yes, but it would be the last event in my life that she would command. I had a plan. In the 6 months following the engagement, I watched Eleanor work. She took control of the wedding with the efficiency of a general planning an invasion. She chose the venue, the prestigious Garden District Club. She selected the menu, completely ignoring my professional suggestions. She defined the guest list, prioritizing her social contacts over our close friends. "Darling," she would say on the phone with vendors, "this is Eleanor Vance, mother of the groom. Everything must be perfect. My son is very important in this city." Clara watched it all with a patience I admired. "Let her hang herself with her own rope," she would whisper to me. "Meanwhile, you do what you need to do." And I was doing exactly that. Discreetly, I began documenting everything. I kept a password-protected digital diary, recording every manipulation, every lie, every sabotage attempt. 30 years of psychological abuse that I had normalized began to form a clear and undeniable pattern on paper. March 12th. Eleanor called Clara saying I was having doubts about the wedding. When confronted, she said she was just worried. March 18th. I discovered she tried to cancel our honeymoon, claiming there were problems with my credit card, a card she still controlled. Each diary entry gave me more clarity. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't an ungrateful son. I was a victim of decades of narcissistic manipulation. Simultaneously, I began the most important operation, recovering my financial independence. Eleanor was co-signer on practically everything: bank accounts, restaurant contracts, even my life insurance. She justified it by saying it was to make things easier in case something happened to me. I discreetly sought out attorney James Thompson, a specialist in corporate law whom I had met through other restaurateurs. Thompson was a serious man, 50 years old, with an impeccable reputation in New Orleans. "Mr. Hayes," he said after I explained my situation, "technically your mother has legal access to all of this, but we can change it gradually and legally." For 3 months, Thompson and I worked meticulously. I transferred the restaurant accounts to a new corporate account where only I was a signatory. I renegotiated contracts, always with plausible justifications. Tax restructuring. Tax optimization. Eleanor didn't suspect anything because I had always been the obedient son who followed her financial advice. I changed my will. I updated insurance beneficiaries. I canceled power of attorney documents she had convinced me to sign as a precaution. With each document signed, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. "Arthur is being very responsible," Eleanor commented to Clara during lunch, not knowing she was praising my liberation. "I always said he had a head for business. He must take after me." Clara told me later, laughing, "It was all I could do not to respond that he was learning to get rid of parasites." The most delicate phase was protecting the restaurant. Eleanor loved showing up there, reorganizing things, giving orders to my staff. My employees, especially Marcus, my sous chef for 5 years, began making careful comments. "Chef," Marcus told me one day after Eleanor had yelled at a waitress, "I know it's not my place, but your mother is affecting the team's morale." It was another entry for the diary. Eleanor didn't respect professional boundaries, caused tension in the work environment, and harmed my business. I discreetly installed security cameras in the restaurant, officially for protection against theft, actually to document her behavior. The recordings were revealing. Eleanor talking badly about Clara to my regular customers. Eleanor promising discounts in my name without consulting prices. Eleanor literally reprimanding a customer who complimented a dish she hadn't approved. "My son sometimes goes overboard with seasonings," I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson, a loyal customer. "But don't worry, I'm teaching him." Teaching him. As if my 15 years of culinary experience, my passion, my professional expertise were just whims that needed her supervision. Meanwhile, Eleanor escalated her efforts to sabotage Clara. She spread through the community that Clara was isolating her son. She invented that Clara had been rude to her in public. She even went as far as calling the library where Clara worked, claiming concern about her emotional instability. "Mrs. Vance," the library director told Clara afterward, "your future mother-in-law called asking if you had a history of behavioral problems." I found it very strange. Another diary entry. The crucial moment came 2 weeks before the wedding. Eleanor decided to make a surprise. She completely reorganized my apartment while I was at the restaurant. When I got home, I found her directing a cleaning crew, throwing away Clara's books, rearranging furniture, even changing the curtains. "Surprise, honey," she exclaimed radiantly. "I made everything perfect for when Clara moves in. A home should reflect good taste, don't you think?" She had thrown away our photos. She had reorganized important papers, including some restaurant documents. She had literally redecorated my house without permission. That night, I made the final decision. "Clara," I said, "I need to tell you my plan for the wedding." I showed her the diary, the recordings, the documents that proved my newly conquered financial independence. And then I explained what I intended to do on the day that should be the happiest of our lives. Clara listened to me in silence. When I finished, she held my hand and said, "It's going to be liberating, isn't it?" 2 days before the wedding, Eleanor made her final control move. She tried to cancel our photographer because she didn't like his style. She called the florist, completely changing the decoration. And the final blow, she tried to alter the dinner menu, replacing dishes I had carefully selected with more traditional options. "Arthur doesn't understand social events," she explained to the club's chef. "I'm the one who takes care of these things in the family." When I found out, I just smiled. Eleanor was digging her own grave, and I had all the tools necessary to push her in. The wedding day had arrived, and with it, my freedom. September 15th dawned with the typical blue sky of New Orleans. As I prepared at the hotel, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't groom's nerves. It was the serenity of someone who had finally made a definitive decision. Eleanor arrived early at the Garden District Club, supervising every detail like a theater director on opening night. She had chosen a navy blue dress that cost more than many of my employees' monthly salary, and circulated through the hall, giving orders to everyone. "The flowers are 1 inch to the left," she instructed the decorators. "And those candles aren't at the right height. My son deserves perfection." Clara and I got married in the most beautiful ceremony I had ever seen, not because of the details Eleanor had controlled, but because of the meaning that only we two knew. When we exchanged vows, Clara held my hand with a strength that said, "Today, we are free." During the cocktail hour, Eleanor was in her element. She circulated among the guests like a queen in her court, receiving compliments for the impeccable organization, and telling anyone who would listen about the sacrifices she had made to raise such a successful son. "Eleanor really organized everything," I heard Mrs. Dubois comment. "What a dedicated mother." "Yes," Eleanor responded radiant. "I always said no one knows Arthur better than his mother. He may be a talented chef, but for these important social things he needs maternal guidance." I watched everything from afar, recording every word. Attorney Thompson was present, as planned, discreet among the guests like a family friend. When it was time for speeches, Eleanor didn't wait to be invited. She simply took the microphone from the master of ceremonies. "Good evening, dear friends," she began with her sweetest voice. "As the groom's mother, I would like to share a few words about my precious Arthur." What followed was a masterful performance of narcissism disguised as maternal love. "You know, I raised Arthur alone after my dear husband left us. I dedicated my entire life to him. I sacrificed my own dreams, my career, my personal happiness to ensure he had everything. And just look at the result." She gestured in my direction as if I were a trophy. Of course, it wasn't always easy. Arthur can be stubborn sometimes. This restaurant business, for example. I always knew he had potential for bigger things. Law, medicine, something more respectable. But a mother learns to accept her children's choices, even when they're not the best ones. My jaw tightened. Clara gently touched my arm. "And now he's marrying Clara," Eleanor continued, her smile faltering slightly when she looked at my wife. "I'm sure Clara will learn to adapt to our family's needs. After all, Arthur has always been very dependent on maternal support. Isn't that right, honey?" The hall was in uncomfortable silence. Some guests exchanged embarrassed looks. Eleanor had transformed a wedding toast into a monologue about herself and a public humiliation of the bride. That's when I stood up. "Thank you, Mom," I said, walking up to her and extending my hand for the microphone. "Can I continue from here?" Eleanor hesitated but handed over the microphone with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stood before 150 guests, family, friends, professional colleagues, restaurant customers, people who had known my mother for decades, people who respected her in the community, people who had never seen what happened behind closed doors. Thank you all for being here on the most important day of my life, I began with a calm voice. As my mother mentioned, she really dedicated herself a lot to me over the years. Eleanor smiled, thinking I would continue her laudatory speech. She controlled every aspect of my life for 3 decades. She chose my college. She sabotaged my relationships. She maintained control over my finances even after I became a successful adult. She would show up at my restaurant unannounced to give orders to my employees. She tried to cancel our honeymoon. This week she invaded my apartment and reorganized my house without permission. The silence in the hall was deafening. Eleanor had gone pale. For months, I documented every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to control not only my life but also Clara's. I have recordings, messages, witnesses, 30 years of evidence. I looked directly at Eleanor. For years I believed this was love, that dedicated mothers really acted this way. You convinced me I was weak, incapable, that I needed your protection. You made me feel guilty whenever I tried to pull away, saying I was being ungrateful after all your sacrifices. I normalized the abuse because I didn't know anything different. I paused, feeling the strength of words I had never said. But Clara showed me what true love is like. Love that liberates, not imprisons. Love that celebrates achievements, not diminishes them. And only then did I realize that you don't love me, Mom. You possess me. There's a difference, and today, on my wedding day, which should be about love between 2 free people, you turned your speech into a presentation about yourself. I looked directly at Eleanor. So, in front of all these people who know us, I want to make it clear. Starting today, you are no longer part of my life. You no longer have access to my finances, my business, my home, or my marriage. Your advice is no longer welcome. Your concern is no longer needed. I paused, looking at her face of absolute shock. Clara and I will build our family based on true love, mutual respect, and freedom. Things you never offered me. Thank you for organizing this wedding, Mom. It was the perfect farewell gift. I handed the microphone back to the master of ceremonies and returned to my table, where Clara waited for me with tears in her eyes. Tears of pride. The hall exploded in murmurs. Eleanor stood in the middle of the dance floor, her face contorted between fury, humiliation, and disbelief. She looked around seeking support, but found only embarrassed looks and some expressions of understanding from people who perhaps had always known the truth. "Arthur," she finally screamed, "how dare you humiliate me like this, after everything I did for you?" "That's exactly what you did for me, Mom," I responded calmly. "You humiliated me for 30 years. The difference is that today it was public." Eleanor tried to approach our table, but Thompson discreetly positioned himself in the way. "Mrs. Vance," he said politely, "perhaps it would be better for you to leave. I have some documents I need to deliver to you tomorrow about the changes in your son's accounts and power of attorney." The realization hit Eleanor like a punch. She understood it wasn't just an emotional confrontation. I had planned everything. Her source of control, her access to my life, everything had disappeared. "You're going to regret this," she whispered, but her voice no longer had its former authority. "Arthur, you'll realize you need me. You always have." "No, Mom," I replied, standing next to Clara. "I needed to get rid of you, and I finally did." Eleanor left the hall stumbling in her own fury, leaving behind 30 years of control and an audience of people who had finally seen her true face. The party continued, but with a completely different energy. It was as if a heavy cloud had dissipated. The days following the wedding were a mixture of relief and controlled chaos. Eleanor didn't give up easily. Narcissists never give up their main supply without a fight. The call started on Monday. 17 missed calls on my cell phone. When I finally answered, her voice alternated between desperate pleading and pure fury. "Arthur, you can't do this to me," she cried. "I'm your mother. I dedicated my entire life to you. How can you be so cruel? Mom, I documented 30 years of cruelty. The difference is that now you're feeling it firsthand, I replied and hung up. She tried using other family members as intermediaries. My Aunt Patricia called on the third day. Arthur, your mother is devastated. Maybe you two could talk and… Aunt Patricia, I interrupted. Would you like to see the diary I kept? The recordings? The documents that prove how she tried to control every aspect of my adult life? Silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor has always been intense, Patricia finally admitted. But she's your mother, Arthur. Being a mother isn't a license for abuse, I replied. And being a son isn't a life sentence. Eleanor's strategy changed when she realized the family wouldn't be her salvation. She moved on to classic emotional blackmail. Health. Arthur, I'm having heart problems, she said in a voicemail. The doctor said it's from stress. You're literally killing me with this ingratitude. I called Dr. Morrison, her doctor for 15 years, since Eleanor had given me medical power of attorney years ago, which I still hadn't officially revoked. He could inform me. Arthur, your mother had a complete checkup last week. She's perfectly healthy. In fact, I've never seen her so energized, he said, choosing his words carefully. Another documented manipulation. The next phase was the attempt at professional sabotage. Eleanor began calling restaurant suppliers, claiming I was going through personal problems, and that she would temporarily take over negotiations. Mrs. Vance, said Tony, my seafood supplier for 8 years, I need to speak with Chef Hayes personally about this. Tony, Arthur is not right in the head lately, Eleanor responded. This marriage has him confused. I'm the one who's always taken care of the family business. When Tony called me to confirm, I felt a cold anger. She was trying to destroy my professional reputation. Tony, my mother has no authorization to speak for my business. If she calls again, please notify me immediately, I said. I sent a formal email to all my suppliers, partners, and corporate clients. Eleanor Vance has no authorization to represent Arthur Hayes or his restaurant in any capacity. Any communication from her should be ignored and reported directly to me. That's when Eleanor realized she was truly losing. The final attempt came 3 weeks after the wedding. She showed up at the restaurant during dinner rush, demanding to speak with me. Is Arthur in the kitchen? She asked Samantha, our hostess. Mrs. Vance, Chef Hayes left instructions that you… Don't be ridiculous, dear. I'm his mother, Eleanor interrupted, trying to walk right past. Marcus, my sous chef, called me. Chef, your mother is here and won't leave. I left the kitchen and found her in the middle of the dining room, creating a scene in front of customers. Arthur, finally, I need to talk to you about this whole madness. You can't cut me out of your life like this. Not after everything I did for you. The entire restaurant had stopped to watch. Customers held their forks in the air, observing the drama. Mom, you need to leave. Now, I said calmly. I won't leave. This place exists because of me. I supported you. I believed in you when no one else… Security, I called. 2 security guards I had hired specifically for this possibility approached. Don't touch me, Eleanor screamed. I'm Eleanor Vance. Do you know who I am in this city? Yes, ma'am, replied Jake, the head security guard. You're the person Chef Hayes instructed us to remove if you showed up here. The humiliation on Eleanor's face was total. In front of a restaurant full of New Orleans high society people she knew who respected her, she was being escorted out by security guards. You're going to regret this, Arthur Hayes, she screamed from the door. You'll realize you need me. No, Mom, I replied loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. I already realized I need to get rid of you. And I did. In the months that followed, I watched Eleanor's gradual breakdown. Without me as a source of control and validation, she tried to dominate other family members. But the wedding story had spread, and her reputation as a manipulator was solidified. My Aunt Patricia called me 6 months later. Arthur, your mother is different, more isolated. She tries to control everything around her, but people are pulling away. Aunt, she was always like this. The difference is that now she doesn't have a main victim to disguise the behavior, I explained. Meanwhile, my life flourished in ways I had never imagined possible. The restaurant prospered. Without Eleanor's constant interference, my team worked with more harmony and creativity. We expanded to a second location. Clara and I bought a house in the French Quarter, decorated with our taste, full of her books and my culinary experiments. For the first time in 30 years, I woke up without anxiety, without wondering what maternal drama awaited me. "You seem like a completely different person," Clara told me one night while we cooked together. "Lighter, more yourself." She was right. I had spent so much time being who Eleanor wanted me to be that I had forgotten who I really was. 2 years later, I learned through Patricia that Eleanor lived practically alone. She had alienated most friends with her constant need to be the center of attention and to control conversations. The few family members who still maintained contact made brief and spaced visits. "She asks about you," Patricia told me. "Says you'll come to your senses eventually." "Aunt, I've never been more sane in my life," I replied. "And Eleanor was never my responsibility to fix." On the 3rd anniversary of my wedding, Clara and I renewed our vows in an intimate ceremony in our house's garden. Only people who genuinely loved us were present. There was no drama, no manipulation, no one trying to turn our special moment into a personal show. During my speech, I looked at Clara and said, "You taught me that true love liberates, it doesn't imprison. That a healthy partnership is built on mutual respect, not forced dependence. Thank you for showing me the difference." That night, as Clara slept beside me, I reflected on the journey. It took me 30 years to recognize the abuse, but only one moment of courage to free myself from it. The guilt I felt for abandoning my mother had disappeared, replaced by the understanding that I hadn't abandoned her. I had saved myself. Eleanor had spent decades trying to convince me I couldn't live without her. The irony is that she couldn't live without having someone to control. Her punishment wasn't something I imposed. It was the natural consequence of her own actions. Today, at 33, I know that some battles aren't won by fighting, but by cutting ties. True freedom sometimes requires the courage to disappoint people who never really cared about our happiness. And for anyone living under the control of a narcissist, it's not love. It never was. You deserve freedom, respect, and the chance to discover who you really are without someone's shadow, trying to mold you in their image. Life is too short to waste it being a prisoner of someone else's ego. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and leave a comment telling us what you thought. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.